Welcome to Precon Geeks, your home for all things pre-construction. I'm your host, John Reich. Today, I am joined by a panel of our Beck Tech employees. We've got Jan Barron. How are you doing today, Jan?
Always a pleasure to be here. Frosty and chilly this winter day.
Oh yeah, that's because you just choose to live in the frozen tundra of Nebraska. So I can't really blame. That's on you. Then we got our Grant Stucker out of Colorado. How are you doing, Grant?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on again, John. It's also cold here in Colorado, but not the frozen tundra as Jan is experiencing. But sounds like Texas has gotten their own little bout of cold weather. Is that right?
Well, it's cold for us. I went to school in Michigan, so this is just like Tuesday in Michigan, but
I know
for Dallas.
I've had some other calls with some other folks on the team, and everybody's wearing like beanies and like all bundled up and stuff. And I'm like, man,
Well, see,
Dallas cold.
it's cold, but I'm still basking in the warmth of our national championship that we just won. So
Ooh.
I'm still riding that high. So it's been a good month of January for me, despite the cold. So our third member of the panel we've got on today is Lauren Senska. How are you doing today, Lauren?
I'm doing pretty well, and I am proud to report Atlanta is also cold.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the theme of the country right now is everyone is cold. So just how it rolls sometimes, but that's how winter works, I guess. So we're going to have everyone on today. We wanted to just basically do some rapid fire questions about pre-construction. And all of us here on the call, we've all been in that pre-construction seat, generating estimates, putting out bids. So we're just going to do some rapid fire questions and see where that leads us and see what happens with it. So, all right. So the first thing, what do you do to scare someone up when you get a bid that is just coming in screaming low on bid day? What's the first thing you would do? Lauren, how about you kick it off for us?
I guess I would call them and ask them what was up, if they see anything funky in the drawings, if they think they could have missed anything.
Okay. That's always, that's general practice, yeah. But Jan, you got any, I see you got that pondering look in your eyes, so.
Depends on if I like them or not, and how bad we needed the job. It could range anywhere from you send them a contract and at the bottom of it, it says, all drawings and specifications, that catch-all line that subs hate, and say, sign it by tomorrow or I got to go to the next guy. Just force them into it. But in most cases, it's a team effort and you try to scope them out without necessarily shopping that bid. But sometimes you just got to say, you're way low and it's scaring me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely if you get a screaming low bid, you kind of get a little bit of excitement, but then you also go, this is too good to be true. And so I would definitely be like, scope them out, make sure they have every single thing against all the rest of the competition. And then I would say, like, just so you know, like, you are like a certain percentage lower than the rest of the competition. I have to make sure that you didn't miss anything because we definitely don't want to get 6 months into construction and you guys come to us saying you guys made a mistake and then we have to figure that out. We were not a GC that would force everybody to eat something just based off of little mistakes. But sometimes those little mistakes can turn into big dollar signs. So that would be my first course of action. Scope them out and actually tell them you're really low. Can you just take another double look at this and make sure you're good?
Yeah, I think it's really tough when you're in a public bid type situation and that low number's out there and someone's going to grab it and take hold of it. So that's a tough conversation to have with a guy. And especially if it's one that and you like and you've worked with a lot, to give them a call and say, hey, this is way low. You need to go back and relook at this. That's
for sure.
It's never an easy conversation, but it's something that we have to do to be good partners to our trades. So
100%.
So on those difficult conversations, what is one estimating task that you hate but would never admit to your boss? I can tell you mine. Take off. Absolutely.
Amen.
Cold calling new subcontractors.
Yeah, cold calling new subcontractors, take off. Just the mundane things that are not are not adding a ton of value to the project. Like,
Yeah.
what I loved about being in Precon and my past group was a mostly negotiated CMGC, brought on very early on, creating and maintaining relationships with ownership and the architectural engineering community. Being somebody that's actually a part of the vision of the project and affect how the direction of how it gets built through feedback that I have by either my previous experience or through the relationships I have through the subcontractor community. And those are the tasks. Anything that has to do with that is what I really enjoy doing. Takeoff is not one of those. It's a necessary evil. But thankfully, as I'm sure a lot of listeners are aware, there's certain things that have come online that have helped that vein significantly. So
Another one that, and it doesn't apply to all the bosses that I've had, but to one or two, estimate reviews. It's supposed to be kind of a high level flinch test. Are things coming in? Ask some questions of scope, but they end up going line by line by line by line. Reduce unit cost here. Oh, you're fudging numbers over there. Increase costs over here, and could be a 2, 3, 4 hour meeting and going over all the minutia of the project. And at the end of the day, we changed the bottom line by less than 2%. Like, you just wasted my life for nothing, and it criticized everything I did the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lauren.
The worst was when the PXs would hop in on that. Like, I enjoyed them with my boss, but after the PX would do it, and then halfway through, he'd call up his buddy who wouldn't respond to any emails or calls and finally get a number from him and throw everything off.
That was the worst. I've been working the sub market for weeks trying to get numbers, and then you just make one phone call and get a number at the last second that no one knows anything about. Yeah, that's never a fun conversation. Never a fun time. So another similar to the difficult conversations and the cold calling subs. So if you bid a job, and if you're looking to bid jobs, I should say, if you're looking to bid new work, what's your best avenue to find new work in the marketplace? And we know that construction's always busy. There's always projects out there. But finding them can sometimes be a little bit more difficult. So what strategies did you guys employ to try to find new work?
For me, thankfully, like, we were very heavy in just being very relationship based, and there wasn't ever any too much shortage of opportunities. I actually remember more saying no to opportunities just because we were just way too busy and couldn't handle, more work. But I think, to add any kind of color to that question is just making sure you have those networking relationships with a number of different groups. And I think one that would actually come to mind is just having a solid relationship with the architectural and engineering community, and just giving them a call if you're looking for something and say, hey, what are you seeing? What are you working on today? Is there any chance that there's an opportunity for us to jump on board to provide budgetary pre-con, or something that will add value to whatever clients you're working with? So I think leveraging those architectural firms relationships would be a big one for me.
Yeah, and I would say, like, and as a trade partner or a subcontractor, the same rule applies. I mean, really just call up the GCs that you've been working with, or that you see are working in the market. See what opportunities there are there. There's always opportunities, and I mean, it does. Unfortunately, cold calling sometimes is required to be able to just call someone up that you might not have a lot of dealing with, but you can get some leads that way. You can get some good inroads that way too.
Sure, I can definitely see, and I experienced this a lot when I was there. From a subcontractor perspective, it seemed like we constantly had leaders from different subs in all different scopes coming into the office and just bringing us some burritos, some coffee, some snacks. I feel like everybody in Precon, no matter where you are in the country, can be tempted with food and free cocktails and stuff. And And so just throwing your hat in the ring to say, hey, we just want to keep touch, make sure that we're still on your solicitation lists. Can I bring in some $2 breakfast burritos and have a conversation and see what you guys are working on? I definitely, the best subcontractors that I've worked with have had that kind of constant communication with us to say, hey, yeah, we need to make sure that they're on the list so that they continue to be a good partner for us.
I came into Precon from the field, and the Precon 15 was cautioned to me my first couple of weeks, and it didn't take long for those subs and vendors showing up with food and doing lunch and learns and taking us out golfing. It's like, man, I'm loving this, but the scale just kept ticking.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's a rough life, I tell you, to get free food. It's terrible. So in a situation where you're working on a project, what did you guys do if you weren't getting clear communication or direction from your owners? So if you're asking questions, you're like, hey, I need to know, like, what do we need to do in this situation? And it's just ghost. You don't get any answers. What do you do to try to draw that owner into the process a little bit better?
I always found it useful to lead the owner all the time, whether they wanted me to or not. And what I mean by that is I would tell them what I'm planning on doing, but there are other options. And if they want to entertain those other options, they need to get on the horn and let's figure it out, because this train ain't stopping for nobody. And some responded positively to that. Some would, immediately pump the brakes, call a meeting, round everybody up and have a conversation. But for the most part, I found that an effective way to engage the owner on the things they wanted to be engaged in and keep things moving where there wasn't a decision that needed to be made by the owner specifically per contract.
I think that also relates back to like those hard conversations where if you do have a owner, developer, whoever, owner's rep that is struggling with making decisions or just stretched too thin, reminding them like, hey, this is why you guys hired us so that we can provide this direction for the project. Here's a menu list of what you have available to you. And of that menu list, there are certain dates that need to be associated with each decision. If we're looking at something like this and we need to change the system, well, that needs to happen now. Otherwise, like after April 1st, we're not going to be able to go back to that and still meet the deadline of CO. So having, a clear menu list of options, the costs associated with them, and then a deadline on what happens if decisions aren't made by a certain time, gives them that just clear communication, clear documentation of where they need to take that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, and I would say this is with anyone that doesn't communicate, whether it's a trade partner, whether it's a architect, engineer, anything. If you give someone a decision that you made, it's much more likely to get a response, and they'll tell you real quick how wrong. I mean, I was wrong so many times in estimating that that I was very quickly corrected by the parties that needed to make the decision. So I always provided the answer. I didn't care if it was right or wrong. I mean, I obviously wanted it to be right, but I'd provide an answer and they would tell me how wrong it was real quick, rather than just say, hey, what is the answer? That usually doesn't get the response nearly as quickly.
Yeah. And I would add to that, like, again, to build off of the relationships you have with your architectural and engineering community, oftentimes, especially even in a negotiated world, the architect and the engineer, those guys, especially the architect, are brought on even before the contractor is, and they're trying to fulfill a vision that the owner has given them. Right. So if you aren't getting feedback from your owner, or they aren't giving you the kind of responses that you need, partner with the architect and the team lead on that side to figure out what is the owner really looking for so that we can provide a recommendation together. That's essentially why we were both brought into the fold, so that we can do these things while the owner is doing some other things. And I think that ultimately that's why they hired us. So if we can create an assumption and a clarifications document that says, here's what we have included, and it's also been blessed by the architect, I think most of the time, like, that goes through, But if you kind of work in your own bubble and you don't involve those other entities, then there's definitely, you get some resistance, and it's nothing I feel like more embarrassing than having the architect kind of point you out and call you out in an OAC meeting because you're not being collaborative.
Yeah, that's never fun. But over communicating is always a better answer than not communicating, for sure.
Lauren
Okay.
has legendary status when it comes to this topic. I would love to hear some of her tips and tricks.
So I did a lot of early on stuff, not so much stuff with deadlines and stuff. Always stuck to my agencies. I would like to over clarify everything. But my big thing is I used to have a boss who told us, hey, they're paying a premium for you to have industry knowledge. You need to know how to fill in the gaps. You need to know what's industry standard. Go back and look at all of your other projects and see what you did in this application, and talk to your subs and fill in the blanks, because we're the ones in the documents all the time. We're the ones pricing every time. We're the ones who should know where the gaps are and how to provide options to fill them.
Great point.
Yeah, very good. That's exactly. You got to give an answer to get any traction there, for sure. So we're gonna switch tacks a little bit. So now we're gonna ask you guys, what's the craziest thing that you've seen as an estimator? Lauren, I know you've got something on this one.
Back to subcontractor lunches. These two flooring subcontractors showed up one day, absolutely hammered, trying to take us out to lunch. Ended up agreeing, but it was very clear that we were driving in separate cars. But we had to sit far enough away from them not to be able to smell their breath.
Oh,
it was an interesting subcontractor lunch. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that was probably one of the craziest occurrences.
Jen, you got one?
Oh man, I'm afraid that if I give any specifics, it's going to be too easy to tell for listeners who know me in my past, who I'm talking about. Oh gosh, I mean, as an estimator, I think the craziest thing was watching an argument between an owner rep and the leader of my team, just flare up into a shouting match. But I also came from the field, and things get nuts when you're wearing boots and a hat all day. And when I was in the field, I worked some travel jobs, and when you travel with a field crew, it can kind of feel like sailors coming to port when they're out of town. The rules go by the wayside, and it gets wild in a hurry. And I'm too ashamed of that history to share any of those stories.
We do want to keep it relatively PG, just to be clear.
We're still family for this is a PG podcast. Okay. I also when I started my career, it was in the field. So I'm sure that we could probably take up an entire podcast of just stories from the field,
crazy field stories,
Precon.
Disguise my
blocked
voice.
That point of my life out completely.
It's
I try not to
blurry
remember it.
Definitely blurry for me. I would say, from my perspective, I lived through, and I would actually use the term survived the estimating pre-construction space during the pandemic, and the insane amount of escalation that you would see in the marketplace. And an example of that is I was working on a charter school that was kind of like a STEM-based type charter school, and they were using pre-engineered metal buildings as buildings in their campuses. And they had a year one building that was their freshman building. It was a pre-engineered metal building. Year two was sophomore, and so every year they would build a new one for their students. It was the same exact building every year. And the first one started in 2019. The second one started in 2020, the third one, 21, and the fourth one in 22.
What an awesome case study.
Exact same building. And so, and the difference between overall cost between the first one and the last one was, I think, an increase in 65% of the cost of the building. Obviously, there's some scopes in there that are more than others, some scopes that were very minimal. But a pre-engineered metal building, when you'd heard horror stories about steel costs rising and gyp steel, like stud costs rising, it was a very trying time to have very difficult conversations with that owner at the time to justify this is what we're getting from the marketplace. Like, no, it doesn't make sense, but I don't know, like, I don't have any other insight for you. I'm completely open book with you. You can see all of the access to all of the subcontractor, bids that we've received, and it has gone up significantly. So that was probably, among other instances of all the other projects that we were dealing with during that time, was the craziest time to live in pre-con.
Yeah, no, that was not a fun experience, I can tell you that. It was I had a similar project that we worked on, and we put the number together based on historical comps right before COVID started. And then the first drawings come out right in the middle of that summer. So everything was pretty much at a standstill at that point. And we ended up pricing it. We actually got sub input this time, and it was about that 60% markup on several major trades. So it was a huge impact to the job. And so we go and present this to the owner, and we did our estimate comparison with the original number and then all the variants and showed all that. And the owner was just like, yeah, this is going to pass. We're going to continue writing with your original number. That did not go well at the end of it. So yeah, it was just sometimes people just don't want to listen to the reality of the situation sometimes. So that's never fun, but it was interesting for sure. All right, so we're going to wrap up our last question here. Pretty broad one, so just throw out whatever you want. So if you were able to keep everything the same but change one thing about pre-construction, what is the thing you would change?
Just
I would
one
change-
thing.
sorry.
You got to change something. Yeah, one thing.
I'd
It could
change
be a big one, a little one, whatever you want to do.
the amount of bids that BG pushes on Precon. I feel like Precon needs to stand up for itself and say, hey, we can only reasonably handle X number of bids a week. Like, we can't do your buddy a favor. We're already overbooked.
So slow down the influx of projects
Yeah.
for each company. Yeah, that definitely is a causes a lot of heartache and heartburn for all of our pre-con teams for sure.
I think that, so I don't know if I had a chance to think about that over the course of a couple of days, my answer may be different, but what comes to mind is when when we had Precon World and Timor was up there speaking, he said something that I thought was powerful that I know we've talked about on the podcast before, is the actual title of being an estimator. I don't think really justifies what estimators do in today's world.
Yeah.
Even when you talk about, being a pre-construction manager, what does that mean? So I think, like, overall, just like a title revamp of the folks that are the boots on the ground, quote unquote, in pre-con doing estimating, having them get their just a title that reflects more of what they truly do on a day-to-day basis. I think
So
that
just
would
a
be
complete rebrand. A complete rebrand of pre-construction. Yeah.
Rebranded. Well, and the other thing too is, like, I speak to a lot of different general contractors and subcontractors, cost consultants throughout the country on a daily basis. And a chief estimator for one group is not the same as a chief estimator for another group, or a senior estimator, or a pre-con manager, a director of pre-con, VP of pre-con, estimator one. Like, everybody has their own definition of things. So, like, it would be nice to have a complete rebrand and be like, if you do this in the industry, you are an XYZ person in pre-construction. Not just selfishly to make it simpler on myself, but also just like to give people titles that are deserving, and obviously make them feel like they are a problem-solving piece of the project. I don't feel like the term estimator truly does it justice.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And on that same thread, and I know I've said this before on numerous different platforms, but Precon came about organically for builders to solve an internal problem, and it's slowly growing into its own profit center. I think in the next 10, 15 years, we'll see it be an actual profit center for most builders around the country. But it doesn't have, Precon doesn't have the same litigious scrutiny that other aspects of the built environment have that have been baked into contract templates through case law and statutes and things like that. And so with that organic growth, it's resulted in everybody just doing what needs to be done at an institutional level. And I think we need to start collaborating and standardizing some of the expectations that are coming out of Precon. Like what are we really doing as a department and as an industry, and start to kind of level set expectations so that we all just don't feel like we're making it up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's a great
So-
point, Jan. That actually sparks something that I'm not going to change my answer. I still think that's relevant, but I also would add to it and say, at least in most of the people that I talk to in Precon, their entire team are people that they're trying to recover on their overall fee of the project.
Yeah.
Not a lot of folks are actually assigning a pre-construction fee for doing the work that they're doing. And I see Lauren chuckle a little bit. I would love to see an industry standard of a Precon fee that owners are now like understand that they're willing to pay, because the value that the pre-construction teams are bringing to these projects is very invaluable. I mean, it's hard to put a number on it because there's significant amount of refinement that's happening on their shoulders throughout the entire design and pre-construction side of things that is much more deserving than just trying to get recovered on the job through your fee, through your construction fee. So having a mechanism that's in place, industry standard that specifically talks to pre-con fee would be, that's less than 1/4 of a point, right? Would be, I think, a very positive impact on the industry.
Yeah, that definitely, so that's segues pretty nicely into what mine is. So the one thing that always aggravated me is, if I don't know if every state has this, but I know in Texas at least, they are not, public institutions at least, are not allowed to select architecture and design services based on a fee, right? They have to go off qualifications only. And so at the end of it, they say, they pick their team and they say, okay, this is the team that we're going with. And that's the only time that the contract value starts getting pulled in, is when they start negotiating after they've made the selection. And to me, if we could just wholesale get off of I'm going to select a contractor based off price, and I'm going to select everything based on qualifications and scope of service and level of service, that would be, not even just for Precon and estimating, but just as a whole in construction industry, would be so much nicer. We wouldn't ever have to be getting down to tenths of a percent on our fee and what's going to be acceptable. It's just we are selected because we're qualified, because we're the best for the job, and then we'll go and negotiate and tell you what the value is after that. I think that'd be
Agreed.
wonderful if we could ever get to that point.
Agreed.
But,
I mean, how many times have you been in the position where you've actually lost a job because somebody undercut fee, somebody undercut the actual direct cost of the work because of something that may be subject to interpretation in the documents or the RFP, and they're weaseling their way into it because they're going to win the job. But then 6 months later, 12 months later, when that specific scope of work comes into the fold, they go, well, we don't have that because that wasn't shown very clearly. That was clearly said in our RFP clarifications, whatever it is. And now you would have actually been the selected contractor if that wasn't something that was a factor. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, John.
Yeah, the number of times either we made last second cuts to get the job because we knew that was needed, or like you said, lost the job because of some omission that someone else made. That happened way too often to me, and I know as a whole, everyone would be, I think, a little bit happier and easier in their seats if they didn't have to do that on every job, for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, that's all the questions we've got for you guys today. So thank you all for coming on. This was fun. We'll have to do it again sometime and see if we can solve some more of the world's problems in pre-construction and we'll get some more out there questions next time so we can hear some of those crazy field stories. I'll get a bleep button so that we can disguise who's on here for next time.
So a voice changer.
Yeah.
Like it. No, I appreciate it, John. Always a pleasure.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. It was a lot of fun, and we will see you guys on the next one. All right. And so for anyone else that's listening, if you have questions that you want us to answer, either in this format or in a longer scale format, please feel free to send them in. You can email us at precongeek@beck-technology.com, or you can go to our website. Suzanne's always posting a lot of good blog posts there, or you can go onto our community and post additional questions on that page. So as always, thank you for listening, and we will catch you guys on the next one.